This was my first plein air painting in the new year. It was actually my first plein air painting in a while. The last few weeks, I'd been mostly stuck in my studio working on a combination of studio paintings, master copies, and a few portraits. It's been a pretty gray winter, and there hasn't been a whole lot of snow. Maybe if there was, I'd get out sooner. On this day, it was actually quite warm, and I decided to go down to the beach to try to get some painting in during the golden hour. I set up just sitting on the sand, trying to get a low vantage point. Working in sight size, I used a pencil to make some quick marks before going in and trying to capture the color of the sky and its gradient right away. One tip for painting skies that I've come to learn is, in order to blend them in well, it's very helpful to make a lot of short vertical marks side by side. And as you work your way up, mixing slightly different color and value mixtures, you can see here I'm putting a test line down. It was a little bit too dark. I went back, I remixed it. I'm making a lot of these short little marks, and that's helping to blend the paint into each other. And obviously on a sky, it's very soft. It has a very ethereal quality to it. We're trying to capture that in our painting. And so those little short marks are something that I find very helpful. After a little bit of back and forth, ta-da! Putting the painting up against the background, it almost blends right in. There are a few tips to help achieve that effect. First off, having the same light on your canvas as what's lighting the scene. Obviously, that's the sun. In this painting, I have the sun right behind me, so the same light that is hitting the sky, that is hitting the waves, that is hitting the water, that's hitting the sand, that same light is on my painting, so it's going to be a lot easier to be able to match the colors. Next off, obviously, I have my painting set up in sight size. It's side by side with what I'm actually painting. I can look just off the painting off to my left or to my right, and I'm going to see the exact colors, so that's going to make it much easier to match them. And the last tip for achieving that effect of the sky almost blending in with the background of the painting and the actual scene is understanding a little bit about color science, optics, atmosphere. There's always this balance in painting between your experience of what it is that you're seeing and your knowledge of the natural world and how that works. And whether in figure painting, that's artistic anatomy; in landscape painting, that might be your knowledge of atmospheric perspective and color gradients. So obviously in the sky, on the horizon, it is more warm and it becomes slightly darker and slightly bluer as the sky gradates up. And in a way, it's also true for the water. If you start looking for these things like the gradients and color and value, you'll start seeing them. And if you look at the water behind my painting, you'll see how it is darker towards the horizon, and it actually becomes a little bit lighter as it gets closer to us, closer to the shore. Now back to what I've just been working on in this painting. You can see that I've been slowly and methodically advancing the painting, working from what is farthest away to what's closer to us. I'm carefully working on mixing the right paint and putting it in the right place, and I'm slowly working out the color of the scene as well as the drawing and the design. I'm using negative shapes to draw out the wave that's closest to me. It's helping me design the actual drawing of the wave even though there's no paint there, so I'm using the edges of it to actually draw it out. And eventually, there are other aspects to the wave that you can use to help draw it. Particularly when the wave crests over, you can see the top side of the barrel right after the foam, and that part is usually darker than the other parts of the waves. And as the waves come and go, they leave behind the wet sand, and that sand, you can see it close to the edge of the water where it's still wet and receding, gets a little bit darker of a shade. So I put those in, not only indicating the value and the color of the wet sand, but also using it to draw in the edge of the wave that is closest to us. And now at this point of the painting process, you can get a really good idea of what the painting is going to look like. Most of the painting is blocked in. The waves, I'm using the white of the paper that I'm working on. And by the way, I guess I should mention that this painting was made on Legion's oil paper. I tried it out. I didn't like it a whole lot. But paper is useful to use to paint on when you don't want to be too precious about your painting. Similarly, as I've covered in another video explaining my setup, I started using oil paper first when I needed something really portable. But back to this painting, you can see that I'm actually now starting to fill in the white of the canvas that was as a placeholder for the waves. Even though the waves can look just so overbearingly white, there's a lot of form happening inside of the rushing foam as the waves crash and break. And so there are actually a lot of nuanced, small value changes that are showing different parts and different things happening in the foam and in the form of the wave. Now, I started this painting by painting the sky and then painting the water furthest away from us, and then coming closer and working my way forward through the painting towards the viewer. Speaking about balances in a painting, earlier I mentioned that there's a balance between painting what you see and painting what you know. There's a balance between working on one section of a painting at a time and finishing that until you go to the next, or working the entire painting all at the same time. Now, different situations might require different approaches, but in this painting, I'm hitting a middle ground. Initially, I focused on the sky, and then I focused on the next band of water, and then the waves. And now I am going from working large, working from establishing the big color relationships throughout the entire painting. Now I'm going back in, working a little bit more of the details, a little bit more on the form of the individual parts of the painting. Now really going in, trying to get some detail on the waves, adding little rolling foams on the underside of the barrel. Those are the small things that you get to focus on after you've already established the big things, after you've already established the foundation that your painting hangs on. To use an expression of one of my first mentors, you can start adding the decorations on the wall. Now I'm going back in, covering the last bit of white on my canvas, so to speak, by putting in the sand. And at this point, it is a complete color study, I would say. Plein air painting, is it ever really finished? We're always limited by the amount of time that we have when we're painting outside. I find it funny to think about when the Impressionists came about in the 1870s, and the big critique of them and of that art movement was that their paintings looked unfinished. That tells me that for an academic standard, their paintings were entirely acceptable as a beginning stage to painting, when you have to capture that color and you have to capture that light. But it's not just a color study, and there's more you're trying to get out of it. And so a painting naturally in its progression goes through all these different stages, working out the composition, or working out a linear block in, or working out the color, or being able to really refine what it is you're painting and get into the smaller forms. It's a wonderful open-ended dance, balancing all these aspects to a painting and seeing where it leads you. It was great to be able to get back out and paint in plein air again. During the winter, when the branches are bare and everything seems gray, the beach is a surprising refuge of color, with the added wintry benefit of an extended golden hour as the sun's arc is going diagonally through the sky, as opposed to the very vertical, quick flash that one experiences in the summer. You can paint a little longer in the winter, try to refine it, strive for a little bit more in just a single session, but eventually the sun sets, the painting session's over. Always unique, but always somewhat similar to all the rest, sort of like each passing wave.